Hello, I'm Darren Magee, and today's topic comes from a question asking what is meant by the term weaponized incompetence, sometimes referred to as weaponized ignorance or willful incompetence. And although this is a term that seems to have went viral a few years ago on social media, the concept has really been around for quite a few decades. So today I'm going to look at what weaponized incompetence is, look at some of the motivations behind it, and lastly, some ways to maybe recognize it. So if you find this topic interesting, please consider subscribing. Now, the earliest reference to weaponized incompetence that I could find anyway was in an article by Chris Argyris, and I hope I've pronounced his name right. I do apologize if I haven't. And that was in the Harvard Business Review back in 1986. He described it as skilled incompetence. In a 2007 article in the Wall Street Journal, Jared Sandberg described it as strategic incompetence. But regardless of the term, it refers to a deliberate or strategic use of incompetence or lack of skill for personal gain, manipulation, or to achieve specific objectives. It involves feigning ineptitude or deliberately failing to perform tasks adequately as a means to advance an agenda or avoid responsibility. And the tactic can be employed in various settings such as personal relationships, workplaces, communities, even in politics. Now, I would like to say, weaponized incompetence is not whenever someone genuinely lacks competency or even struggles with certain tasks. It often involves a deliberate act to portray oneself as incapable, inept, or ignorant for personal advantage. It usually involves someone crafting a narrative to shape how others perceive them and their abilities, perhaps to manipulate opinions, expectations, or influence how they're treated or regarded by other people. Now, some examples of weaponized incompetence could be, first of all, someone claiming not to know how to do a specific task, and this could be regardless of how many times they've done it previously or how many times they've been shown how to do it. Some cases, they might refuse to learn to do it at all, just to avoid having to do it in the first place. Or someone could feign a lack of understanding about an issue just to evade accountability or responsibility, particularly if something fails or maybe it hasn't been done in the first place. In some cases, the incompetence can be weaponized selectively. It could be used as a tool to undermine or con others. Behind a facade of inadequacy, someone might hide their true capabilities, their intentions, or their motives. By appearing less threatening or capable than they really are, a manipulative person can catch their adversary off guard and gain an advantage. Or someone might delay or mishandle certain tasks just to impede progress on certain projects. There could be stalling tactics on something that's maybe particularly important to others. So here we would see it being used as a means to sabotage. Then, a perceived incompetence can be strategically used as a form of vulnerability. When someone presents themselves as in need of help or guidance, well, this can elicit a protective response from others. This would be quite common with covert narcissism. There can be a downplaying of capabilities or feigned incompetence in certain areas, and this is to elicit both sympathy and support. So they might deliberately underperform or make a mess of things while maintaining a facade of helplessness. By portraying themselves as dependent or powerless, they manipulate others into giving them support, attention, assistance, and this can reinforce their sense of superiority and entitlement. They also get to shirk responsibility or evade accountability. Exaggerating a sense of vulnerability or helplessness can also be a way of manipulating others into giving up their time, their resources, and making them their priority. But regardless of the reasons or the tactics, and again, particularly with covert narcissism, the weaponized incompetence often carries on until it just becomes normal. Other people around them stop asking them to do anything, they don't expect anything from them. And in cases like that, those people might begin to feel frustrated, they might experience burnout, some might even harbour feelings of resentment. But then, they're accused of being uncaring and unsympathetic. So what's the motivation, the reasons behind weaponized incompetence? Well, as always, there's never a one-size-fits-all kind of answer. With some people, there may be an underlying anxiety, a low self-confidence. They focus on the strain and the difficulties, but not really paying attention to their skill sets, their capabilities. Some people might fear failure or being judged harshly, so what we see as a self-protective mechanism to avoid the emotional distress. often it comes with perceived inadequacy. Some people, and again this would be common with narcissism, they may experience cognitive dissonance whenever they're faced with a task that maybe challenges their self-image. For instance, maybe having to do something they consider to be beneath them. So to protect their ego, they might resort to feigning incompetence as a way to preserve their sense of status. And people with strong narcissistic traits often struggle forming authentic connections anyway. Relationships tend to be surface level, usually as a means to fulfill their emotional needs. So with covert narcissism, they can display helplessness just to gain their supply. Some people feign ignorance to avoid having to take responsibility. They might pretend they don't understand simple concepts, basic instructions, or they feign confusion over why something might be important to others in the first place. And it's really a form of gaslighting. In some cases, you might even call it weaponized stupidity. So, how do you spot it? How do you recognize weaponized incompetence? Well, maybe not always easily, certainly not at first anyway. Sometimes someone may really genuinely struggle with some kind of anxiety or low self-confidence. However, in cases like that, you might see them at least trying, or at least working harder in other areas as a way to compensate. And someone might ask, could you show me how to do this, as opposed to standing with their hands in their pockets saying, I don't know how to do that. When it's weaponized incompetence, what I think you often see is someone making an absolute mess of what they're doing. Then they point at it and then say, see, didn't I tell you I didn't know how to do that? Sometimes they might even seem smug as they're saying it. Or they might claim they don't know how to do something, even though they've done it previously. Or they might claim they don't know how to do something because of some particular issue. However, that issue doesn't seem to stop them doing other things when it suits them. So I think quite often what you're looking for is an inconsistency in the lack of ability. They might show capability in some areas but underperform or appear incompetent in others. And usually it's the same kind of skill set. Or you might find someone who can perform brilliantly in the company of someone they want to impress, but anybody else, they just go back to being helpless and inept. Another indicator could be whenever they make no effort to improve. Every request is just too difficult or they're always too busy. Every solution will have a problem, every idea rejected. And no matter what's suggested, well, you might hear things like, well, I tried that and it didn't work. In other words, you just hear excuse after excuse. But I think one of the biggest indicators of weaponized incompetence could be when you meet someone who's just a perpetual victim. They are always helpless and always powerless. They always seem to foster situations where other people feel compelled to rescue them, support them, or do things for them. And in cases like that, what you often see is a consistent lack of accountability for their own failures and their own mistakes in their lives. It's always everything and everyone else's fault. And lastly, pay attention to the timing of the perceived incompetence, because someone might strategically display ineptitude, but only at certain moments and only at certain times, and it's either to sabotage something or it's to try to elicit a specific response. So to summarize, weaponized incompetence can often be subtle, not always easily identifiable. There can be a genuine lack of knowledge, skill, or confidence, and that's not necessarily malicious or manipulative. But weaponized incompetence usually occurs whenever someone pretends they can't perform even a simple task just so that someone will do it for them. They can pretend they don't understand simple concepts or plain simple language. Now, it can be an unhelpful coping strategy just to deal with anxiety or stress. Sometimes it could be laziness, but it can also be intentional and calculated. It creates a false narrative and it utilizes helplessness. It can be a way of shirking responsibility or used as a way to control others. So that's a brief outline of weaponized incompetence. There are many other examples I could have used, so please feel free to use the comments section for any I may have missed. But if you find this topic interesting, please consider subscribing, and until next time, thanks for watching. There was a guy I used to work with many years ago, and he was the sort of guy that everything was a hassle, everything was an effort. It was anything for a skive. He was just very, very lazy. And one time the manager asked him why he hadn't even started a job she'd asked him to do about a week ago. And he said he knew nothing about it. He feigned ignorance. She told him she had sent him an email with all of the instructions in it, to which he replied, You didn't tell me I'm supposed to check my emails. What was the term I used earlier?